The number was 40,000. That's how many cuneiform tablets were found in a single layer of ash. Not scattered, not looted, stacked, filed, organized by subject, by date, by the name of the scribe who pressed the reed into clay. I found this while researching something else entirely, and the number hit me before the implications did. 40,000 tablets. Someone had been keeping records, meticulous, bureaucratic, almost obsessive records, of grain deliveries and astronomical observations and legal disputes and hymns to gods whose names we can barely pronounce. And then, one day, those records stop. The ash comes. The tablets survive. The civilization does not. This is a story about what gets erased. Not by fire. Fire, as it turns out, is often the archivist's best friend. This is a story about what gets erased by the people who come after. By the historians who decide what is worth preserving, what is worth translating, what is worth mentioning at all. By the institutions that control access, that classify findings, that let entire museum wings gather dust for 100 years before anyone is allowed inside. The part that keeps me up at night isn't what burned. It's what was carefully, deliberately, almost surgically removed from the story we tell ourselves about where we came from. The official story goes like this. Human civilization begins, more or less, in Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE. The Sumerians invent writing. The Egyptians build monuments. Everyone else is a footnote until Greece arrives and invents philosophy, and then Rome arrives and invents administration, and from there you get a reasonably clean line to the world as it exists today. It is a tidy narrative. It has the virtue of simplicity. Most historians would acknowledge it is also radically incomplete, but incompleteness, they would say, is not the same as suppression. Let me be fair to the official narrative. The people who built it were working with what they had. Archaeology is slow. Funding is limited. Language barriers are real. When you can only excavate one site per decade, you will inevitably build a story around the sites you have. There is no grand conspiracy required to explain why certain civilizations end up underrepresented. Neglect, budget cuts, political indifference, these are sufficient explanations for enormous gaps. The world is not always hiding something. Sometimes it is simply not looking. But then you start following the specific threads, the individual cases, the moments where the gap between what we know and what we're told is not a matter of funding, not a matter of time, but a matter of what someone, somewhere, decided the rest of US didn't need to see. That's when the pattern becomes difficult to dismiss. Let's start with the numbers. In 1872, a British museum employee named George Smith was sorting through a crate of clay tablet fragments from Nineveh, fragments that had been sitting in a London basement for nearly 20 years, when he found something that stopped him cold. He found a flood narrative, a detailed, emotionally rich, structurally complex account of a catastrophic deluge, a man warned by a god, a boat, a dove, animals 2 by 2. The story predated Genesis by at least 1,000 years. Smith reportedly stood up, began pacing, and then, according to witnesses, took off his clothes. The British Museum funded an expedition to find the missing fragment. They found it within the first week of digging. Within the first week. Speaking of convenient discoveries, there is a pattern worth noting in the timing of major archaeological finds relative to the political context surrounding them. In 1922, Howard Carter opens Tutankhamun's tomb. Egypt is in the middle of a nationalist revolution against British occupation. The find dominates international headlines for months. The political situation receives considerably less attention. In 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered in Qumran. Israel is about to become a state. Scrolls that complicate certain theological histories will spend decades in the hands of a small committee of scholars, a committee that controls access, publishes selectively, and declines to release photographs to the broader academic community until 1991. 40 years. The full corpus of scrolls is not completely published until the early 2000s. The timeline isn't subtle. Which brings me to the city that shouldn't exist. Göbekli Tepe. If you have not encountered this name, I want you to hold the date in your mind. Approximately 9,600 BCE. This is the date when construction began on a complex of massive carved stone pillars in what is now southeastern Turkey. The pillars are 12 feet tall. Some weigh 20 tons. They are arranged in precise circles. They are covered in sophisticated bas-relief carvings of animals. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, wild boars, rendered with an artistic confidence that speaks not of primitive experimentation but of a tradition already mature, already refined, already carrying generations of accumulated skill. Göbekli Tepe predates the invention of agriculture, predates pottery, predates every city we thought we knew. According to the standard model of human development, the people who built this site should have been nomadic hunter-gatherers without the organizational capacity to coordinate a building project of this scale. What no one explains is how you organize thousands of people to quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton stones without a settled society to feed them, without administration, without supply chains, without the infrastructure that we were told had to come first. The site was discovered by a Kurdish shepherd in 1963. It was surveyed briefly and then, and here is the part that matters, classified as a medieval cemetery by the University of Istanbul and largely set aside. It sat for 30 years, until a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited in 1994 and recognized what he was looking at. He would spend the rest of his life excavating it. He died in 2014. The excavations continue. Current estimates suggest that only 5% of the total site has been uncovered. Maybe the delay was bureaucratic. Maybe it was funding. Maybe it was the simple difficulty of recognizing something so far outside the expected pattern that the mind rejects it before the evidence has time to register. But maybe, a discovery that requires the complete rewriting of the human timeline is not always met with enthusiasm by the institutions whose authority rests on the validity of the existing timeline. I spent weeks trying to understand the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Not the famous burning, the one attributed to Julius Caesar, or to the Christian bishop Theophilus, or to the Arab general Amr ibn al-Az, depending on which account you prefer, but the slower, quieter destruction. The one that happened not in a single fire but over decades of deliberate neglect, selective preservation, and what one scholar, in a paper buried in a 1987 issue of the journal Mouseion, called The Curation of Ignorance. The library at its height is estimated to have held somewhere between 40,000 and 700,000 scrolls. The range itself is telling. We don't even know how much we lost. What we do know is this. The library was not simply a repository of books. It was a research institution. Scholars received stipends. They conducted experiments. They corresponded with counterparts in India, in Persia, in China. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy in approximately 240 BCE. Hero of Alexandria described a rudimentary steam engine. Aristarchus proposed heliocentrism 17 centuries before Copernicus. That's not a footnote. That's not an anomaly. That is evidence of a scientific tradition whose scope we cannot fully reconstruct because the primary documents are gone. The pattern indicates that what was preserved was not simply what survived. It was what someone decided was worth preserving. And the decisions made by those early Christian and later Byzantine librarians, about which texts represented dangerous pagan knowledge, about which philosophical traditions were incompatible with the emerging theological consensus, those decisions shaped what the Renaissance got to rediscover, and therefore shaped what modernity got to build upon. We did not inherit the ancient world. We inherited an edited version of it. Speaking of edited versions, there is a document sitting in the Vatican Apostolic Archive that I want to tell you about. It is designated APF Volume 308. It is a report from 1582, written by a Jesuit missionary to the court of Akbar the Great in India. The missionary describes, in extraordinary detail, a library in Patna containing manuscripts he estimates at 200,000 volumes, astronomical treatises, mathematical works, texts on medicine, metallurgy, and what he describes as natural philosophy of a sophistication equal to or surpassing the ancients. He requests funds to purchase copies for Rome. The request is denied. The reason given in the archive's response, which is also preserved, is that the transport of such volumes would draw attention to knowledge better left unknown in Europe. Better left unknown in Europe. The archive holds that correspondence. I have not seen it myself. Access to APF Volume 308 requires a specific scholarly credential and a 6-month advance request. But it is cited in a 2003 monograph by historian Jyoti Basu, published by the Indian Council of Historical Research, a document that is currently out of print and available in exactly 4 libraries in the Western world. Maybe I'm seeing patterns where none exist, but the archive is real. The denial is documented. The reasons given are written in Latin, in a 16th century hand, by someone who thought they were making a reasonable administrative decision. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. There is a cave system in the Yucatan Peninsula, sealed in 1947 by the Mexican government's National Institute of Anthropology and History, following a survey that described, and I am quoting from the survey abstract, architectural features inconsistent with known Mayan construction periods. The caves were sealed for further study. The further study was never published. The caves remain sealed. In 2019, a team of underwater archaeologists exploring the submerged tunnel network nearby, the largest known underwater cave system on Earth, the Sac-Acton, found evidence of human habitation dating to at least 8,000 BCE. They found fire pits, tool marks on walls, the bones of a teenager, a girl, who fell into a cenote 12,000 years ago and left behind a skeleton that gives us a window into who was living in the Americas far earlier than the textbooks have ever acknowledged. Her name, given to her by the research team, is Naya. She is not a footnote. She is a person. And the civilization she belonged to, the one that was already building fires and making tools and presumably telling stories about where they came from, that civilization is not in the history books. Not because it wasn't there, because the tools for understanding it arrived late, and the institutions controlling access moved slowly, and somewhere between the discovery and the publication, a decade passed. The timing is almost theatrical. Let me tell you what connects these stories. Not the specific facts, the tablets, the pillars, the sealed caves, the denied requests. What connects them is the structure of the gap. In every case, there is a discovery. In every case, there is a delay. In every case, the delay is explained by something reasonable. Funding, politics, bureaucratic process, scholarly caution. And in every case, the thing on the other side of the delay is smaller than what went in. Less complete. More compatible with the existing story. The pattern isn't that someone is lying. The pattern is that the systems we have built for preserving and transmitting knowledge are not neutral. They have preferences. They have inertias. They reward confirmation and penalize disruption. A discovery that fits the existing model gets funded, published, celebrated. A discovery that breaks the model gets deferred, qualified, buried in supplementary material. Maybe this is simply the way knowledge progresses, slowly, conservatively, with the past defending itself against the future. Maybe the delays are always innocent. Maybe Göbekli Tepe really did just need the right archaeologist to come along. Maybe the Vatican archive is full of fascinating denials that mean nothing in aggregate. But here is what I cannot resolve. Here is the pattern that the evidence, taken together, refuses to let go of. The civilizations that got erased, the ones whose records stop, whose libraries burned, whose caves were sealed, whose tablets sat in London basements for 20 years, they were not random. They were not evenly distributed across geography and time. They cluster around moments of conquest, around moments of theological consolidation, around moments when a new power had strong reasons to be the first civilization, the origin point, the thing that everything else is measured against. And once you see that clustering, once you recognize that the gaps in the historical record are not random but patterned, not accidental but structural, the question stops being what did we lose and becomes something harder. The tablets from Nineveh are in the British Museum. The scrolls from Qumran are in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. The bones of Naya are in a laboratory in Mexico City. The manuscripts from Putna, the ones the Jesuits saw in 1582, no one knows where they are now. The survey of the sealed caves in the Yucatan is sitting in a filing cabinet in Mexico City. Accessible in theory, unavailable in practice, waiting for a request that has not yet been filed. The evidence does not require a hidden hand. It does not require a secret council deciding what humanity is allowed to know. It requires only the ordinary mechanics of power, institutions protecting themselves, scholars deferring to gatekeepers, records degrading while the people who care about them wait for permission that never quite arrives. The archive still exists, some of it. The part that survived the fire, the earthquake, the administrative decision, the broken filing system, the understaffed institution, the underfunded excavation. The part that didn't get reclassified as medieval. The part that wasn't left in a London basement for 20 years. There were people before us who understood more than we do, who watched the stars with a precision we are only now recovering, who built things we still cannot fully explain, who kept records of everything, the grain and the law and the hymns and the math, because they understood that knowledge is the thing that survives even when the people who carry it do not. We inherit an edited version of what they left. And the question, the one I do not have an answer for, the one that follows me out of the archive and into the ordinary day, is not who did the editing. It is what we would find, and who we would become, if we ever got to read the unedited draft. I don't have answers, only patterns. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them.